Grad School 101 with Dr. Bradbury.
Hi, welcome back to Grad School 101. Today we're going to answer a student question that this one is tricky. I got to tell you, the question basically boils down to, Dr. B, I'm confused about the difference between getting a degree, a graduate degree in helping or in mental health, and getting licensed in mental health helping. Are these the same thing? Are these overlapping things? What is the difference here? And you're right to be a little bit confused, okay? So know that we are going to help to clarify that for you today. And in fact, there is a distinction. The process by which you get a degree and the process by which you get licensed are different processes in mental health. And in fact, there are several different types of license that you could get, and those only match up not in quite a one-to-one correspondence with the degrees that you can get. And so know that this is understandably a really confusing topic for students. You know, I genuinely, when I went to graduate school, when I started my PhD program in clinical psychology, I was much more naive than many of my students today, and I'm so glad to be able to help to make fewer and fewer naive students out there. I had no idea that there was a separate licensing process. I actually thought, like, you go in, you get to graduate school, you do your PhD in clinical psychology, and then you've got a PhD in clinical psychology. And so, yay, you can then be a clinical psychologist and go out there and work and practice and do the things that clinical psychologists do. And it was only when I got to graduate school that I found out, oh no, there's a series of hoops that you jump through to get your graduate degree. And then that graduate degree only constitutes one of the hoops that you need to jump through to get a license. So it is not the case that you are required to become licensed. And in fact, it is also not the case that the state is required to give you a license just because you have a degree that might make you eligible for licensure. So this is a term that we want you to start to become familiar with, and that is the term license eligible. A license eligible person is someone who is engaged in a program of study that will lead to the sense of the set of qualifications that they need to be able to then sit for the set of licensing exams and credentialing process that's required for the license. So, two kind of basic things that you have to do in order to get licensed. One is you have to do all the stuff that allows you to then know how to do the work. So you have to get all of the clinical hours that you're required to have. You need to be able to see patients, see clients, actually do work with them in an applied way. And usually you need to do at least some of these hours from within a graduate program that's training you in how to do that, right? So that's a whole set of things that you have to do, is actually go through, jumping through those academic hoops to get the credentials that you need to be able to then be eligible to sit for the licensing exam. And then separate from that, there's this whole set of things that you have to do that basically involves taking a series of tests and jumping through a series of hoops. And it goes like this. So the first thing, if you're going to do a doctoral level license, which is the type of license, of course, that I know the most about because that's the license that I have and the license that I pursued, that process usually entails, not doing much related to it other than tracking all of your clinical hours. And this is a whole thing. We've got software for it. We've got all kinds of stuff. When I got done with my graduate program, I knew exactly how many thousands of hours I had spent, not just in direct contact with clients, but in supervision. And then within that nested set of information, what types of clients, so in different sociodemographic categories, different types of diagnostic categories, right? All of that type of thing. What type of work were we doing? Was it assessment or therapy? These are all things that you have to track while you're going through graduate school. And I will say that that's something that's vastly improved from when I was a graduate student. We now have lots of great apps and tracking devices that allow you to do this as you go through. So you won't be like me up in the attic of the clinic where you worked, digging out the files to make sure that you count up all the hours that you spent, right? And just make sure that you do it from the very beginning, because then by the time you get done, you're going to have a lot of information that you need to be able to apply for internship. And in fact, the process of applying to internship, the internship is a pre-doctoral internship. It is required for your doctoral degree. So even though it's done in a separate place, it's not done through your same graduate department. You actually apply completely separately for it. So you get all the way through, or most of the way through, your graduate program, your doctoral program, and then you say, oh, time to go on my internship. And you apply to internship and you get matched with an internship placement. And that internship placement is a full-time year, usually working in an applied setting like a hospital or a student counseling center, depending on the type of placement that you'd be interested in terms of your own career goals. And you pursue that work, usually while you're simultaneously trying to get finished with your dissertation, right? So I wrote up my dissertation while I was on internship. And it's usually one of the most stressful years of a doctoral program because you're having to work so much in too many different places, basically, and working on too many different things. But then when you get done with that year, you're given the PhD and you have a bunch of hours that have also been contributing to your eligibility for licensure. Now, you would think, well, I might be done then and ready to take the license exam. No, my friends. Instead, what happens next is that you have to have postdoctoral supervised hours. So even once you're done with the doctorate, you have to actually pursue clinical hours where you are supervised by someone who is already fully licensed. And here in Texas and in various places, what you need to have is 2 years of postdoctoral supervision. So one of the things that I always advise my students when you're interested in a doctoral level license, and frankly, this extends also to a number of different master's level licenses, they're just even more complicated, so sorry about that. But when you're kind of talking about, I think I'm going to want to pursue a doctoral level license, what you're going to want to do is actually look for the requirements for licensure in 2 different states. And the reason that I say that is because every state has its own licensure requirements. And in fact, I'm licensed to practice in Texas, but that doesn't mean that I could just fly to Missouri and open a practice and start practicing there. Instead, if I wanted to move to Missouri, I would have to get licensed in Missouri. And I would have to actually look up what were the licensing requirements for Missouri and hope that they weren't actually different in some way than the ones for Texas or for Georgia or for Virginia, which were the other 3 states where I already paid attention to my credentials. So the trick to use is this one. Go and look up the licensing requirements for the state of New York and for the state of California, because those 2 states have been the leading edge of requirements having to do with licensing for many years, and their licensing requirements are usually more stringent than most of the other states. And so that means that if you meet the licensing requirements for those states, you will not find yourself in the unenviable position of needing to fix a problem of low credentials when you're already done with school and you're ready to be working. An example of this, very concrete example, is that in those states, you're required to actually have 2 courses, one in graduate school, one on ethics and one on multicultural issues. In many other states, including Texas, you're only required to have 1 class on those things, on a combination of ethics and multicultural issues. So, if in fact I wanted to go to one of these states that requires both courses, if I hadn't already been paying attention to that and hadn't pursued an extra class, I might actually have to go back to school to get this other class to then be able to be eligible to get licensed, even if I've already been licensed for years, right? So you really want to be paying attention to what those most stringent requirements are so that you can try to make sure that you kind of clean up any little bits that in fact your program is not ensuring that you get while you're going through as you're, being self-responsible and taking care of what your own licensing path is going to be. So then you get done. You've got your postdoctoral supervision gets done also, and these are done in a variety of ways. Mine was an organized postdoc that was half clinical and half research that I did through the university that I was at for my internship, Emory Med School. Lots of people do their postdoctoral required hours that way, but not everybody does. Some people can be supervised in private practice and in all kinds of other kinds of arrangements that can be made. But it's very important that you realize that even when you're done with the PhD, there are going to be these extra hours that you have to get. Now, that's what you have to have for the hours. What else do you have to do? Well, it turns out you have to take a series of exams. So the first exam that I had to take was called the EPPP. This was one of the exams that makes me eligible for licensure. It is not in and of itself a licensing exam. Even if you pass it, you're not going to be handed a mental health license. Instead, you will have jumped through one of the preliminary hoops that allows you to then sit for the licensing exam. Right? I know, there's a lot of hoop jumping. You can do it. It's just a matter of taking the time to go ahead and really think through all of the different steps of the process and to not get overwhelmed by that process as you're going through it, right? So you can do it. I know you can. And as you actually work your way through the EPPP, the EPPP is kind of annoying because it's actually one of those tests that has tons and tons of information on it that isn't going to be relevant to your particular area of practice. So it covers like 11 different topic areas in psychology. I was tested on IO, for example, industrial, organizational, that kind of thing. That's all on the EPPP. But it really wasn't a difficult test to pass, even though that was the case. And most people take the EPPP while they're on internship. So there are all these organized kind of like study groups on internship and that kind of thing that allow the interns to all get together and take the EPPP together. Now, once you're done with the EPPP and you've gotten all those hours together and you've got your graduate degree, then what you're allowed to do is actually apply for the process of being licensed. There's a provisional license process that happens where you can actually apply before you're done with all of your postdoctoral hours. You've got all of your other requirements met, but all you need to do is be supervised in a postdoctoral way. Then you apply for a provisional license, and that provisional license application involves basically demonstrating all of the stuff that we've already talked about, right? That you actually have all of those hours. There's this credentialing process where you actually demonstrate the types of experience that you have, and you write all of that down and they review all of it. And then they tell you what areas of practice you are considered competent to practice in. Then, you haven't even taken the licensing exam yet, but it's coming. That's the next thing on the list. And that is that then when you're actually ready and you're eligible to take the exam and you've been cleared to take it, then you go in and in Texas anyway, you take 3 exams. 2 of them are written and 1 is oral. The 2 exams that were written, one of them was a content-based exam that had to do with what types of clinical decisions you would make in different situations, how you would treat a particular problem, what different types of issues you would be watching for, what assessment measures you would use, right? Content, that type of stuff. And then the other exam is a laws and rules exam, where you actually take an entire exam around issues like the legalities of confidentiality, when you're allowed to break confidentiality, when you have to, right? All of those different kinds of things, as well as all of the other laws that are involved in practicing appropriately and within the law in your particular state. So that's the other exam that you have to take. And then there's an oral exam. Really? Are we not even done yet? I've been working on it forever, right? Yes, it takes a really long time. And by the time you get done with that oral exam, the oral exam is like nothing. I can promise you. I don't know how anybody would ever fail that thing. They told me, actually, my supervisors told me, when you go in for your oral exam, what they're trying to do is make sure you don't have 2 heads. I don't even know exactly what that means, but it really dovetails for me with the criticism that oral exams have received, and that is that oral exams are gone in most states. They just remain in the South. We've kind of got them still down here, and many people have expressed the concern that this exam could be used in a discriminatory way, that we could actually use this to decide to not give people licenses who look like they have 2 heads, whatever that would mean, right? Maybe that one head isn't looking like quite the right kind of head that we want it to look like. So there are those of us who get concerned about the ethics of that. And I will tell you that it definitely seemed like nothing more than a formality when I did it. I went in, and it was actually done here on UT campus, over in the education building. And I went in, and 2 of the oldest psychologists I had ever seen in my life were there. I mean, literally, they were wearing like long cardigans and like were like bent over, walking like this. Like, I'm not even exaggerating for you. And they must have been in their 80s, genuinely. I truly believe both of these gentlemen were in their 80s. And they came in, and it was just the 3 of us in the room, and they tossed me a couple of softball questions about stuff that I already been asked about 1,000 times. And I gave them my good answers. And they said, "Congratulations, you're now licensed." And that was about it, right? And it was definitely an anticlimactic moment, given the number of hoops that I had jumped through to be at that moment. So, yes, the process of getting licensed is very different than the process of actually getting a graduate degree for licensure. The process of becoming licensed at the master's level is actually very similar to the process that I just described. It just has a slightly different order in terms of when you actually get all of your hours. So you get more of your hours when you're done with your graduate program than during your graduate program when you do a master's, right? Because it's very quick. And so you get through your master's program, and then you still have quite a lot of additional clinical hours to be able to finish up after that in order to be able to be licensed. So that is the tough question to make sure that you ask. There is a tough question that comes out of these facts that I've been giving you today. As you are getting ready to apply to graduate school, what is going to be the tough question that you are going to ask? Well, if you're going to be going into doctoral programs, the tough question that you're going to ask is, what are your internship placement rates? How well do your interns get matched? How well do your students get matched to those pre-doctoral internships so that they don't experience a delay in terms of trying to get matched to an internship that can then cost you additional years in your graduate program? How well are they doing that? That's the tough question for the doctoral programs. The tough question for the master's programs is, what do you do to support your students so that once they have that master's degree, but they're not yet eligible for licensure, what do you do to help them to get all of those many thousands of hours of supervised experience that they are required to have? Because unlike the doctoral programs, there aren't a lot of organized internships or organized postdoctoral fellowships that allow for people to get those hours. And so really, most of the time in master's programs, that's done by connections with the community. So that there are people who are supervising in the community, in community settings, all of the people who have come out with their master's degrees and are ready to get all of those clinical hours for licensure. Some programs are much better at doing that than others, so that's definitely going to be something that if you're applying to master's programs, you're going to want to look into. All right, that is my set of tips for you about licensing for today. Please do not hesitate to ask me questions. If you are listening to this now, you undoubtedly have my email address. Feel free to email me or stop by office hours to see me and talk about grad school.